BioWare is one of the studios that helped define what we now call the modern RPG. They gave us cinematic sci-fi epics like Mass Effect and old-school masterpieces like Baldur's Gate and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, games that are still used as benchmarks for storytelling and player choice. So when BioWare launched Dragon Age, expectations were sky high. And here's the uncomfortable truth: Dragon Age was never bad, but it was never sure of what it wanted to be. Looking back now, after replays, expansions, patches and years of hindsight, it becomes clear that Dragon Age has been in an identity crisis since day one. Not because of a single failure, not even because of Electronic Arts, but because of a long chain of design decisions that never fully agreed with each other. The latest Dragon Age entry only made this impossible to ignore. Today I'm not here to talk about nostalgia or to argue which game is the best. I'm here to dissect why this series constantly reinvents itself, and why that reinvention keeps breaking it. My name is Henry Hoffman Myers, your humble hex grid scientist, and in this series we'll go through every Dragon Age title, tearing apart its mechanics, systems and design philosophy to understand where it all went wrong, and most importantly, where it almost went right. This is Dragon Age, Retrospective and Legacy. Dragon Age Origins was released in North America on the 3rd of November 2009, 2 years after the successful release of Mass Effect 1 and 1 year before the release of Mass Effect 2. DAO received widespread critical acclaim for its story, characters and combat, selling over 3 million copies in its first few months, making it a massive hit for BioWare. It is often seen as a spiritual successor to the early Baldur's Gate games. Many people say that DAO was the best game in the series, featuring a dark fantasy world compared to a more colorful high fantasy in later titles. The first game of the series has a darker tone, featuring a bleak medieval setting that tries, at the very least, to subvert some of the tropes found in the fantasy genre. We will not focus especially on the story, only on the parts that actually influence gameplay and mechanics, but there will be spoilers down the road, so you have been warned. The game lets you select from 3 different races, 3 different starting classes and 6 different backstories called origins. I like what was done here. The available origins depend on the race. For example, an elf can be a city elf or a Dalish. A dwarf can be a dwarven commoner or a dwarven noble, but if you want to play a mage, you have to go through the Magi origin, as mages in this world are forced to live in a tower. I like that. It is a clear intervention from the lore. The rules of this world dictate something, that mages are not free and no matter their race, they all have to follow a set of well-defined rules. Choosing a race and a class has real consequences. I dislike the idea in other games where anyone can be anything. Each origin gives your character a unique starting scenario. This scenario defines your role in the wider world from the very beginning. It's a bold way to introduce the world's lore right from the start. It is risky, but it works. There are 6 origins. Even if you don't like the flavor of one of them, you can still try to experience the others. The game relies on getting you hooked on the lore and your role in it from the first hours, which is done quite well, as it doesn't feel forced nor does it feel overpowering. And every origin is trying to tell you a different moral. For the Dalish, it is the deep lore and sense of mystery, but also the pain of losing a friend. We will see later, the story will come back to these introductory moments in different ways for each, giving more flavor and some variety to the overall narrative. No matter what you choose, by the end of the introductory segment, the character will be conscripted into the Grey Wardens. Putting the story fluff aside, this is quite well done. You can experience a specially tailored tutorial area similar to how World of Warcraft handles starting zones. You can familiarize yourself with the main mechanics of the game in a controlled environment. This is good game design. This also falls into an even greater design choice. You are not the chosen one, you are just one of the many, and even in the later stages of the game, you can delegate the responsibility of solving the crisis to someone else. One of your companions is way more important than you in the overall structure of the story, and I think that is brilliant. Dragon Age Origins has a typical RPG combat style found in its predecessors, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights. This type of gameplay loop has been modernized by Pillars of Eternity, Tyranny, or Dark Envoy. It is called real-time with pause. It is fundamentally tick-based, but under the hood not fully continuous like an action game. The combat operates on a discrete update loop. Actions are processed in short time slices and each tick updates attack rolls, damage calculations, and so on. In other words, attacks are not animation locked, such as in the case of action combat, nor are they based on hit detection. An attack can visually miss but still hit mechanically or vice versa. Timing is abstracted and stats value way more than reflexes. One thing I personally found odd at first, but we will see later why it is actually important, is that there is no ability queue. Characters are able to execute one action at a time, then they default on either basic attacks or other abilities based on their tactics. So you cannot plan too much ahead and instead have to react to what happens on the battlefield. It is not bad per se, just a bit strange. And this is where the pause is important. Pausing mid-game is actually a good idea, having time to scour the battlefield for high priority targets and for a better understanding. The AI works on a system called tactics, a list of if-then rules. To be completely honest with you, I felt no need to use it and just assumed direct control of the characters every time it was necessary. There is nothing I can really say badly about the combat in itself. Real time with pause is a great synergy for RPGs. It is trialed and tested. It is also pretty easy to implement correctly and easy to grasp and not really hard to master. What I can criticize is that the combat system in DAO is really watered down. I understand that the devs try to make it more appealing for people that are not quite familiar with D&D rule sets and that can't be bothered to learn the mathematics behind it. I see no roll of dice, even if there is one behind it. Obviously the game runs some calculations in the back, it is even written in the description of some abilities. But the player can see nothing of those calculations. More than so, sometimes it is hard to say if a certain ability manages to do its purpose as the visual clues are non-existent for some of the abilities. There are no enemy HP bars, except some placed dramatically above their heads. I cannot see if the enemy is under status effect or not, with the exception being stuns, knockdowns, freezes and some other. Every single design choice for the combat in DAO screams oversimplified. I am fully aware it was done to appeal to a somewhat wider audience, and I get it. There is no complicated progression system. There are a couple of your typical stats that you increase per level. There are 4 subclasses for each main class that provide 4 more abilities and some extra flavor, but the progression is quite linear. You can choose 2 subclasses in the original campaign. I chose Bard and Ranger, but there is no dramatic change in gameplay. I liked that you have to unlock these classes during the game, some being locked behind certain game impacting decisions, only during the first playthrough. And you might say, well, if there are so few classes and abilities, then it should be easy to balance. Well, they failed to do that. I started my playthrough as an archer and it felt underwhelming at best. I got constantly outperformed, not only by the other ranged class, Mage, but by melee fighters as well. There is no archer specialization, and the utility on the battlefield was really lacking even with good equipment. I picked Ranger as a subclass hoping it is going to enhance the archery gameplay, and I was wrong. The Ranger can only summon different creatures, which looks cool, but it is quite weak. Most of the creatures in the game have a certain ability called Overwhelm, which renders the target immobilized while taking absurd amounts of damage. A squishy character might go 100 to 0 in less than a few ticks, giving little to no room to interrupt. Rangers animals, although the same entity as the mobs, lack this particular useful ability for no good reason. The problem I have with the combat mechanics is that they are not consistent. Archers are extremely weak and useful only when you want to actually break some packs of enemies into smaller groups. Having an archer in your party provides little to no benefit and takes away an important slot. Your party does not benefit from the same advantages as enemy packs or enemies in general, making it quite hard to comprehend. And that leads me to the next point. Goddamned mages. The tick system rewards effect over execution, so damage over time scales perfectly with ticks, status effects get resolved instantly, but most importantly, crowd control removes characters from the simulation entirely. A stunned enemy doesn't miss attacks, it stops existing as an actor for a set amount of ticks. Mages are able to sleep, paralyze, freeze, petrify, and force field. All of these resolve on tick boundaries, always reliable. Also, the staff never misses an attack, it just doesn't crit. A tick doesn't care if you hit one enemy or 10, making AoEs extremely strong and CC the most important type of ability in this game. Mana is also a soft limiter. It is impossible to know how much mana an enemy spellcaster has, so dealing with them as fast as possible is the desired approach. Almost every single encounter in this game assumes mage presence on both sides, as the one that lacks them is overwhelmingly disadvantaged. More than so in later stages of the game where packs of enemies are at least twice the size of your party, more than one mage is enough to make short work out of your guys. It is a terrible design. Warriors fight enemies, mages fight the combat system itself. You might say yes, they are weak, but they own every single tool required to keep playable characters at bay, and it can be quite a challenge to reach them when you are swarmed by enemies. Except for this weakness that is made up for in numbers, it becomes quite easy for the enemies to protect their casters, while it is increasingly harder for the player to protect theirs. Another strange choice is how the anti-mage class, the Templar, is extremely weak. A Templar gets 4 abilities that should in theory counter some of the CC and abilities of mages, yet the balance of power is clearly against the Templar. So party composition becomes extremely important. It becomes clearer and clearer while progressing through the game that there are right and wrong answers for your party composition, based on the class of the main character. It was simply unsustainable to keep 2 rogues in my party as my tank was simply incapable of keeping the aggro, leading to insane wipes. I also don't like the concept of having only 4 party members. I always thought 5 is the golden number. The Mage Problem says a very important aspect that should never be present. In an RPG, every single playstyle should be somewhat viable. Sure, some might be harder, others easier, but the player should have the tools to create their own way of dealing with the challenges of the game. That's why I profoundly dislike the concept that companions should change classes whenever the player wants, or that the player can be whatever they want to be when they want to be. DAO starts pretty well and for the most part hides its functional flaws. I'd say that for the first 10 to 15 hours you enjoy a polished experience, but its design flaws become impossible to ignore in later stages. The problems I want to address in this chapter are multiple, so let's start. The game starts with the main character being drafted into the Grey Wardens. After a series of events, they become the last vestige of an already dying order, and this is great. The problem I have is that the game fails to provide that sense of character development. Let's take for example, Ogres. They are a common enemy, hulking abominations that excel in tankiness and deploy several abilities that hinder your party's cohesion. In the first couple of hours, they are presented as extremely difficult enemies. Unfortunately, they are. The problem is, I do not get any sense of improvement, although I'm constantly slaying ogres throughout the whole campaign. My character doesn't seem to evolve from Grey Warden intern to a senior at all. Ogres aren't easier to slay, they aren't difficult either. They stay pretty much the same. At a certain point during the last quest, you can kill some grunts with one single hit, but this feels extremely artificial to convey a false sense of strength. I cannot see any numbers, I cannot assess that my party improved or that these enemies have artificially lowered HP. I strongly believe it is the later option. DAO hides its math so well that it also hides its progression. Also, my playthrough did not use mods, except one. and the fact that there is a mode created specifically to solve this problem says a lot. I am talking of course about the well-known skip fade mode, which completely eliminates a portion of the game. The fade in DAO is despised not because it's badly made, but because it violates almost every expectation the game itself teaches the player up to that point. Upon reaching that part, the game trains you to correctly build a party, to coordinate roles and to solve fights via synergy and post-based tactics. Then you are suddenly playing a solo puzzle combat game inside a party-based RPG. That is by no means variety. That's mode switching without consent. And you are not even playing your own character, you are shape-shifting into different creatures with limited abilities and shallow internal balance. This level provides no consequences and no real bonus. Nothing you do during this level matters, the level doesn't communicate anything and it overstays its welcome by a lot. The game also has a really bad tactic of throwing hordes of enemies at you in different combinations. This happens especially after the first half of the game. The deep roads, which are a great example of level design, have the unfortunate opportunity of throwing tens of the same mobs in slightly different combinations at you. This is a stupid attempt to overwhelm your party through sheer numbers. If they wanted to show that we are traveling through the enemy territory, then it might be fine, but to me it looks like the devs just try to buy time. This tactic will inevitably lead to some game over screens as you adapt to the combinations and locations in which these packs spawn. As such, the overall playing time increases, but it feels less and less impactful and rather cheaper. Like I said in the mechanics chapter, AoE scales linearly in tick systems. A spell can hit one enemy or 12, the cost is the same. In the cases of hordes, a warrior's value scales linearly, a mage scales exponentially. Hordes are not harder, they are more rewarding targets for mages, thus accentuating the already existent mage problem. A tank simply cannot hold the threat of so many enemies by himself, there is no framework for that, healers cannot outpace the spike in actions per tick. As such, having an offensive mage in your party becomes more than a balance issue, but a matter of survival. Hordes completely nullify single target excellence, flanking loses meaning when you are surrounded and archers become even less relevant as they are swarmed. This kind of encounter design leaves no room for advanced decision making, transforming AoE abilities and CCs into optimal solutions which are obvious and repetitive. The real-time with post-combat system shines when enemy abilities are distinct, and it is exceptionally great in small to medium-sized encounters or boss fights, but it is a complete design mismatch when you have to fight for hours the same enemies. It's getting boring. This cheap decision leads to what I like to call combat fatigue. When a game relies heavily on combat for its gameplay loop, too many encounters in a quick succession will inevitably lead to a sense of tiredness. This makes the game a burden rather than a pleasant activity. To summarize, hordes feel cheap in DAO because they don't increase tactical complexity. Hordes just expose how overwhelmingly efficient AoE and CC is in a tick-based system. This design choice appears to be just trying to milk as many hours as it can from a game that is halfway finished. Dragon Age Awakening was released in 2010 in America and in Europe. It is an expansion pack and a continuation of the story. The player can import their character and continue their story, or create a completely new character that is established as a warden commander from another place. This expansion introduces more abilities for the main classes and 2 more unlockable specializations for each of them. And I think this is the amount of content that should have been in Dragon Age Origins from the very beginning. This expansion manages to ameliorate some of the flaws I have mentioned in the past chapters, and this is proof that Origins shipped incomplete. I no longer felt like playing a rogue was some sort of curse in this game. The Legionnaire Scout specialization massively increases the odds of survival in the field by providing some tanking abilities. The added ability 3 provides a massive damage increase for rogues and some extra tools. The ability called Heartseeker was definitely something that should have been present in the original campaign. I like that the devs somehow understood that being swarmed by the same enemies over and over again for hours is not fun. Dragon Age Awakening provides some more flavorful enemies that weren't present in the first game. Fights don't necessarily feel like a chore anymore. That's not thanks to some ingenious design choices, but because the characters feel complete and not some trial versions of their respective classes. By the end of the expansion, my character was dual wielding weapons almost her size, and that felt awesome. Other than that, mages weren't really that present in packs of enemies, but some boss fights clearly were designed with having a mage in your party, mostly for revivals. Talking about boss fights, they were really a downgrade from the original game. Most of the bosses were the medieval equivalent of bullet sponges with a gimmick. The two main antagonists have some really disappointing boss mechanics. The expansion also introduces some management mechanics, but don't get your hopes high, there is nothing too complicated. You have to do some fetch quests here and there and to grind some gold to upgrade your keep for a possible siege. It is not hidden, but hinted at from the very beginning. It gave me a feeling of Neverwinter Nights 2, a game that has a similar system but much more complex. The combat felt a bit more fluid, but I cannot state for sure that there are any systemic improvements to the already established formula. To summarize, I think that Awakening brought some more flavor to the game. This flavor unfortunately had to be included in the original as it is the bare minimum. Dragon Age Origins is often remembered as a classic, and in many ways it deserves that reputation. But when you strip away the nostalgia and look at its systems, its balance and its pacing, a different picture emerges. This isn't a game that failed, it's a game that never fully committed to what it wanted to be. Origins lays down ideas that are genuinely brilliant, meaningful character origins, a grounded fantasy tone, and a combat system that could have supported deep tactical play. But those ideas are constantly clashing with watered down mechanics, inconsistent encounter design, and a system that quietly rewards only a narrow set of playstyles. And that tension, that internal disagreement is going to define everything that comes next. In the next episode, we'll look at how BioWare reacted to these problems and how Dragon Age 2 didn't just change direction, it was overcorrected. If you enjoy deep mechanical analysis, unapologetic critique and RPGs taken seriously as systems, consider subscribing. Leave a like if you agreed, a comment if you didn't, and tell me which Dragon Age game you think understood itself the best. My name is Henry Hoffman Myers, your Hexcrit scientist, and this was Dragon Age Origins.